I mean, this one we should be able to expect. Chances are, if you're given the keys to something important like that, you're probably going to help someone else. Now, that can differ. There could be a group in your organization that handles exactly the troubleshooting. But at the end of the day, pilot of the ship is the one that's going to say, yes, that's the problem. No, that's the problem. Fix this, fix that. That's going to be part of that area. And now I have a big asterisk over here for the managing security and access. This is, we talked about like getting in a busy situation if you're just by yourself or with a team. This is really the responsibility for everyone, right? Security and access, everyone's got a responsibility for that. But if they make you the person responsible for the actual security from the Power Platform point of view, there's got to be, as they say, specific instructions or specific guidance on how that differs from the security group that you may have in your group as well. And by the way, if you don't have a security group and you're the one doing it, that could be essentially a problem to itself, a heavy workload. So this is important to understand that these kind of roles may be separate and they may be handled in a different way. All righty, let's continue. Continuing on the goals over here, these are common goals, and make a note here that these are agreed to by the organization. You might say, this is my goal, I want to do this. The organization says, nope, don't do that, or I want you to do this instead, give you the priorities and everything else. The organization at the end of the day will be the one that determines whether or not you're going to be following your path to a particular goal. All right. So what could be the items like this? These are just samples of what they are, but these are common examples that we do recommend. Protecting the organization's data to ensure compliance. Okay, that one, let's take a look at that one. Responsibility for everyone. We talked about that earlier with security. And this is one that when something goes wrong, chances are, if you're the Power Platform administrator, they're going to point to you, even though there's another group or set of people that are responsible for it. So keep that in mind, that if that's going to be a goal, you want that in writing. That's a goal. Please make sure that you're not docking me because this was missed and we didn't agree to it. All right, other things, getting people to start using the Power Platform better, empowering them essentially. They want you to do this effectively with the least amount of cost. They don't want you to be adding and building up and running up that credit card on them a lot. This is typically a goal to help you get going. Now, some of the organization might say, nope, that's not the goal. Only certain people can have it, and certain people are allowed to work with it. Pick that goal and follow through. Optimizing performance and scalability. It's interesting because this one over here potentially could be a Microsoft thing. It's Microsoft's Power Platform after all. Shouldn't they be optimizing the platform to make it work? Yeah, but there's things that could happen that the administrator could have a say in. And and I'm not talking about like the actual programs themselves and developing them. Because yes, developers and everyone else or the makers have their responsibility for building some of these tools, and making them work a certain way. But the administrator at the very end should at least have a view on how these things are working, and at least have the opinions, or at least be able to give guidance to help those folks do it better. They might say, well, it's probably better not to have a virtual table pointing to a SharePoint list in that particular case because it's going to slow down your performance, and you understand that. As the administrator, you're probably the one that gave permission or gave that information to make that work. And this is an example of at least being proactive to help optimize performance, at least through your knowledge. Ensuring transparent communications is one big one. I have this in like all my admin discussions. Communications at the end of the day, when people know what's going on, when they're transparent, when they have that line open, is the way to say make your life a lot better. As they say, it's not exactly better to ask for permission later and deal with it. It's I would say, much more effective when people know what's coming as far in advance as they can figure it out, than when things hit them by surprise. Then you have to work things out. I mean, you can work them out later, but if you think about it, when they're expecting it, good news or bad, everyone's planning for it. It's a safer way to go. All right, and another thing that they would do is they have this concept of, and this is from the guidance doc, fostering that culture of innovation and collaboration. This is essentially saying the administrator should be one of the role models for playing nice and being a yes person for everyone and everything else. That one's a big, of course, asterisk as well. This one could be in contradiction with the organization's goals if they say, well, we don't want folks to be using this unless they are trained or they're a developer and everything else. That's definitely in contradiction to that in some extent. But then again, with that within that small group, you can still play that role. Right. If there, I guess there's a burning question in the chat, please someone get off mute and let me know. I can answer those if it's a burning one. Otherwise, we will have discussion at the end. So otherwise, take notes if you want to wait till the ending point. We'll be able to take a look at it. All right, let's take a look at these tasks that you would be dealing with to figure out what these tools are going to be. So there's several types, right? There's ad hoc, there's milestone-based tasks, and there's tasks that you do on regular intervals. The ad hoc stuff, troubleshooting, common. User requests something. There's an inquiry. I have a question. The milestone ones, there's a target that you have to make. Something that says, by this time, we're going to need X to happen. Either X number of users, or we expect that if, for example, we have 50% capacities hit, your job now is to do something to make sure that we're going to be able to handle things. That's the milestone-based task. Then there's the ones for regular intervals. And this one actually is very important. Those periodic tasks, what goes on daily, weekly, and monthly. This is the concept of the cadence, where you're always looking at it and you have that memory to follow through, that muscle memory, and you're going to make your muscles stronger, say, when you follow through with your cadence. To ensure that you're looking at things that should be looked at, you're following through with things that should not get behind. If you want to make sure that you stay on your track and stay in your schedule, those are probably some of the most important tasks to get through. All right, so here's a nice list for you. I believe we're going to share these slides later on, maybe not immediately, but within a day or so of this conference, we'll be able to have them up there. And if not, again, hit me on the LinkedIn and say, Ralph, can I have that like now? And I might be able to send you a PDF or the actual document that you can use. And I just put this here on the list to make it easy to follow through. All right. I think it's time. We are ready to actually look at the tools. 15 minutes in, so that gives us good time. All right, a quick overview. The safest tools, and when I say safest, the ones that will not affect your system, that maybe if you do something might go wrong, something might break, or you might run afoul of organization permissions and everything else. These are the ones that are the built-in pieces. The browser-based tools are the most common tools that we're using for Power Platform. Whatever they're using to actually develop is pretty much the same tool for the administrator, the safest tool. If Microsoft comes up with something, chances are it's a safe tool. If a third party comes up with something, or even if it's a community thing, is it safe? Is it as good to use? That's the part that you will say it will have to go like one level down until you decide, or someone actually works out and says, yes, this is okay, or even Microsoft comes back and blesses it and says, yes, we've given this the blessing. And we'll talk about that when we talk about like the COE and those kind of tools. All right. These tools are not complete without their processes and everything that goes with them, the patterns and everything else. You have a tool, you don't use it correctly. Just like anything else, things can go wrong. You can get hurt. You don't want to like hit a thumb or anything like that in, let's say, the metaphor for that to work. You have to have those as part of it. So we will give you the tool and give you the idea of the process as well. So again, on the next part over here, I'm not going to try to go through some of these in that much detail. We can take a look at them a little bit later. You have to have an idea whether or not the tool is useful to help or not. Sometimes you'll hear about a tool. I'll give you an example. The code review tool that's out there. Someone says, hey, there's a code review tool. Is it useful? Can we manage with it? Maybe I should be using it for something else. They might say, well, that's not allowed to be used because it's touching things in a certain way, or right, no one knows how to use it. So here's a tool. Hey, great. How does it work? Oh, geez, you have to be very good at the deep development of the Power Platform piece that you're working on in order for it to make sense. All right, so this is a concept that's going to come up. There are homegrown tools. The idea of the homegrown tool means somebody came up with something. And this is actually encouraged. In fact, the COE toolkit is in some cases built upon the DNA of some of those homegrown tools that were built at organizations that they worked with Microsoft, and someone said, oh, wow, this is a great idea. Let's make this part of the toolkit, or let's put this up in the community because it's actually really good and it becomes a really important thing that people end up following or using, or it becomes a de facto practice. These are encouraged. Here's the thing, though. The organization needs certain stuff. So not any, we're going to say that for all the tooling and everything else that's out there, at some point, the organization will have stuff that is not covered by anything else. There has to be homegrown tools. So these are encouraged. Again, they may not be as safe as the ones that Microsoft necessarily put together, but if they were built to work for your organization, there's no reason to put them aside. All right, and of course, at the end of the day, the administrators are encouraged to make their own tools. So you use the same thing that you're doing administration for, if actually using it and trying it out, other than you improving your skills to be able to just to support it. And you're using it now to help you in your job to actually be more productive. So again, those tools and those ones, by the way, come in that when you actually create them, could also be, as they say, contributed to the community or even find their way into the COE itself. There was what they used to call admin in the day workshops. Before the COE existed, half the admin in the day was actually building what became parts of the COE. So if you can imagine, admins before actually had to be like developers and makers at the time. You don't have to be now. Again, this is only for the folks that have the time and the wherewithal. Mind you, that's like you're doing your own citizen dev for it over here. But now you don't have to be in that particular area. However, it's encouraged when you go through. Okay, a quick link there to the Sharing is Caring if you want to learn more about doing that. I strongly recommend it because actually, as they say, paying it forward will pay you back when you have nice tools to play with. All right, let's look at these tools. Really quick list of the tools, and we'll try to take a look at them in more detail. Actually, we're going to see as many of these as we can within our time. The Power Platform Admin Center stands on top. The most important tool via your browser is the Admin Center, and that thing keeps growing and adding functionality every time. So keeping up with it and making the most of it is your strongest tool. The next tool that if you're an administrator and if you're handling an organization that is in any professional level, maybe it's making money, it's in charge of someone else's money, however you're doing it. This is one of those tools that are almost like important to have in. If you don't have it, you will end up having to build the pieces that are not there, right? There's some things that are doing, like, for example, license management pieces like that are only in the kit. They're not part of the main system, and for reasons that they're not part of the main system is because of how they're handling it. They can't make one size fits most situation. The COE gives you that opportunity, gives the opportunity for Microsoft to do so outside of the product and more often. Those kind of systems that they believe can handle most of the issues, and most importantly, they make that open source or available for you to take and modify. That's the key. It's really hard to give something and sell something that has to have a very specific service level agreements and then allow you to go ahead and essentially muck with it and break it apart to make it work for yourself and then still support it. So those are the top two tools that an administrator, the actual Power Platform administrator with that title would be using. The next one, of course, is the Power Platform CLI, and not really, of course, it's their command line. It's essentially the scripty things. Administrators in the M365 world, or I should say the Windows world, have been known to be usually script folks that do things with scripts that go in the command line. They'll do a command, get things done, and that's how they do their administration versus just clicking on Windows. That actually all came later, right? The CLI essentially goes back to that area, but the CLI, or the command line interface system that you actually can download, will be helping developers, makers, and of course administrators do that kind of work. So say you're not using the COE for whatever reason, technically speaking, all that ability, at least the functionality pieces, are available through the CLI. You have to string it together yourself, but you can actually do it. The only thing it can't do, of course, is actually beautiful interface and reporting, because that is, after all, command line. Other things we'll be looking at, the VS Code extensions, and we're going to talk about VS Code in a little bit, because that's going to be another tool for some administrators, but not necessarily all. There are other things. Remember, we talked about features and processes, and we're going to start looking at those. Power Platform has GitHub Actions. If GitHub is something that you're allowed to use and you want to make things happen and go through a process, you want to make sure that it's not fat-fingered every time you do something and it goes through. GitHub is a nice way to get it done. There's a ways to do what's called plugins for Azure DevOps as well. So we talked about GitHub. There's going to be the Azure DevOps side. It's not that everyone, by the way, all these tools are not something that you'd all be using, but these are the main tools that are available. The case of GitHub and Azure DevOps, we'll talk about a little bit more. Since I did this first version of this about a few months ago, this has been updated with a very important feature called Managed Environments, which itself has been updated several times in just the last few months. This is actually a very important feature. The concept of managed environments is Microsoft's attempt to give you, for a little bit of a premium price, the ability to manage things within the interface without all the CLI and all those other pieces in a strong way where you have as much of those parameters ready to go, right? And it'll handle things like ALM, like the pipeline stuff going in, the application lifecycle management, and of course, the environment information that's in there. This is actually a super important tool. The organization might say, we don't want to pay for it, we don't want to deal with it. Let's just say that knowing about it and what it does will give you an idea of what will probably have to be dealt with manually or with these other tools on the other side. There's another couple of other tools that we're looking at, a few other tools that we're looking at over here, like the Process Advisor, and actually I'll cover that one a little bit. Essentially, it's a feature, a very nice feature that can help you as an administrator see your own processes, even though it's used for other purposes as well. You also have processes, why not see them optimized? And other tools that we look at as an administrator, you're sometimes tasked to deal with, or at least you should be aware of, the Creator Kit, and I talked about the code review tool. And of course, there's going to be the case of the Copilots and GPT. How does that come into play, Ralph? We'll probably take a look at that in a little bit. All right, let's start with that first most important tool. And then there's nothing else, right? It's like if you have to have your browser, and it's got to be compatible. It's got to be essentially the Chromium browser, essentially Chrome or Edge. I do prefer Edge. I do like the fact in Edge that we can have profiles, so I can come in and put a profile as maybe an administrator and someone else, or better yet, if I have multiple tenants that I'm dealing with, I essentially have my Edge profile point straight to them to make it happen. There's really nothing else that's in there that will help do, I mean, a giant portion of the work that you have to do. In fact, a lot of even the COE tools are visible through the browser or going through the browser. A lot of them, not all, but that's essentially your first thing that you have to get installed. Okay, now the first main area within the browser, of course, the administration center. I have a list over here of the different items and what they're about. All right, when we're talking about environments where you're managing them, that one's an obvious one. The top tip that we have right now is to take a look and see how managed environments work. At the very least, if you can't do it in your organization because you're not allowed to, try to find yourself a dev tenant. We'll actually cover that in a little bit later. Get yourself a dev tenant, play with it, practice it, see what it does so you can see what's missing. At that point, you can potentially make the case for it in your environment, or you understand what it does so you know what gap you need to fill in order to get your job done. So that's an important one there. Other things that are in there, there is analytics, and the top tip there is the obvious one to turn on the analytics. So like, wait a minute, aren't the analytics just on by default? Why would you have to turn something on? Some organizations are strict and have policies on collecting data which they feel may be problematic. It's the concept of tenant-wide analytics. You have to actually turn on the switch at the top level so that the data gets collected. And this data, by the way, only you can only collect about a month's worth of data. So here's another tip that's very important. Because you can only collect a month's worth of data, whenever you're looking and using these tools, that's your view going back that far. If you need to something bigger to see further away, there is a method to do that, and it's in the COE to be able to get that to happen. And actually, we can cover that a little bit later. But still, having that particular tool to do the analytics, which even if it's within a month, it's when a closed scope, is a very important area to go. There's a thing for billing, by the way, which is still in preview. You might have seen it. It says billing and it says preview on it. This is where, if you're in the license management mode, you would be able to go. Right now, this is really happening mostly on the M365 side. This is here to help, but I will say it is in preview mode, and yeah, we have to wait a little bit to get there. But keep it handy, keep your eye on it because it will get better. All right, other things you can do over here are the obvious one for settings, leveraging things like the weekly digest or other default environments settings that you're going through. You'll find yourself living in there once in a while and hopefully not too often, because technically speaking, as administrator, you want to try to get things figured out, set, and go. Other things over here, you can manage your resources. There's other things, Power Pages sites, other assets and D365 apps and capacity. That's available there. That is not available on any other tool. And even command line stuff would, if you try to put that together yourself, is very tedious in that particular case. Help and support, again, the only place you can get it is going to be on the admin center. This is interesting because if you get yourself your own dev tenant to play with, all right, the support, when you actually follow through the links over there, will actually help. They will actually treat it like you are a regular customer needing help, and they'll give you, like, you want this right away? Would you like us to just send you an email and everything else? That way you can understand and get help to understand things that maybe are not yet enabled on your organization, or you don't want them to see your organization. There's a way to set it up so that Microsoft, when they come in, can only see what they can see. But regardless of that, say you want to try out something that you're really not allowed to use over here, and you found out the problem exists in your dev tenant, that is a good place to put up the support so they can actually see it, try it out, maybe solve it, upon which now you can go to your regular tenant to make it work. So there's a major tip right there. Other things you can look at over here, data integration, essentially your traffic cop area for bringing in data into Dataverse. That's that feature over here. Data management, it's just the cloud and gateway connections. Here's the thing, as an administrator, are you the data person or are you the connections person? Do you have to understand the data for this stuff to work? There's usually other people that are going to be associated with that. But just so you know, as the administrator, this is in your purview, technically speaking. So if you do not understand how this is being used by, say, the other administrators, you probably want to learn a little bit more about it. And finally, there's the policies themselves, the DLP, which what we talked about earlier. This is also in the main screens. Take a look at our time. We're doing okay. All right. The next big thing is the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. And I want to emphasize the word starter. People think that when they get this and they're like, wow, well, it does a lot, but it doesn't do everything we need, or and it's not working for us very well and everything else. It's like, well, here's the thing. It's a starter kit. It was essentially built to get people going, to get them accelerated. The very early versions of these were only doing a few things. The newer versions seem to do a lot. They almost seem like a product themselves. And someone says, why isn't that just a product? Well, there's a reason for it. The idea, again, is it's always and it will forever be an accelerator to get going through. Some of those features might find themselves on the main admin center. But in the end, they needed something that they can more quickly and flexibly update and make changes to and adapt to the changing ways people use the platform or the environment itself. Microsoft updates on usually a half year. You've seen those, like 6-month basis or everything else. Here's the so-called monthly updates you might have heard about. Those monthly updates are usually for experimental features that they're getting very big on doing right now, especially with all the AI stuff coming in as well. But at the end of the day, they can't support that kind of updates all the time. And some administrators say, please do not be challenging me monthly on the basis and rating upon me all these changes. In the case of the COE is that even though it updates monthly, all right, they give you the guidance that says every 3 months, you should probably update it if you want to maintain its effort. But you might say, forget that. I'm going to take it. I'm going to make it my own. We're going to make it our organization. And we're going to bring in the changes piecemeal from understanding how it works. That's all fine and well. So keep it in mind that the idea of the starter kit was for you to take it and make it work for your organization. So if you find features in there, we'd never use that and everything else, well, that's all fine and well. Or that's not done the way we want it. There's nothing stopping you from changing that. So first, I have to make that very, very clear. All right, what's the biggest thing in here? The Power BI dashboard. The Power BI dashboard, all right, comes, there's 2 things over here. It actually comes All right, with apps and agents and everything else, and those pieces. But you have to actually have the Power BI application to make it work. Is the question? Well, actually, if you want to get installed as the administrator, yes, you will need that if you want to play with it at that level. But technically speaking, it is a Power BI, which means when it gets pushed up into the organization, it is basically a web application at the end of the day. So it depends on how you want to do the administration. The dashboard itself, opening up in Power BI, is so that you can manipulate it, or maybe you prefer the client experience for dealing with it and everything else. So as a tool, think of it more of as a service that just happens to have a tool to be able to work with it. All right, so that's the most, actually, I think I would call that the top most one of the system. In fact, if you're going through the COE installation, you try that, you'll notice that's the first thing they try to make fixed and get working before most everything else. And that means turning on flows and everything else so that there's data to show up there. There are governance components, so compliances processes, cleanup of orphan resources. These are a whole bunch of features that come with. You have to review them and see which ones best apply. Some of the good ones, for example, finding orphan resources or setting up a quarantine process are pretty cool, but they may not match what your organization is trying to do. In fact, some of these are usually not turned on because they essentially interfere with perhaps the way business is being run now or the processes that are being run now. They're important tools, so at the very least, understand what they do and then be ready to make the modifications to make those work for your organization. The nurture tools. Nurture tools are not really admin-y things. They're basically to make, remember that part of the task that we looked at, which said you should encourage people to learn more and get everything else. Well, the nurture tools were geared towards the maker in general. But I will say that you can take those nurture tools and point them back toward the developer community itself. And at least not so much that you're going to get them to adopt or get better at it, but you're really giving them a chance to grow in the technology. So if citizen developers to decide and your own developers focus, you can actually use those same tools to help them out. And in some cases, though, they overlap perhaps systems you already have in your organization for learning and everything else. So keep that in mind, that sometimes some things may not necessarily have a place to play. There is an admin view app itself. We talked about the Power BI up top. There's actually a model-driven app that if you want to learn how to make an enterprise-level model-driven app that actually does all these great things, take a look at that particular app. Open it up under the covers, give it to one of the developers to check out. But this is essentially the piece that brings it all together into one place as an app. All right, the person using the app would probably need to have a license to use it. Yes, I used the L word. We scared some folks already, but they would probably have a license to use it over here in this particular case versus the Power BI, which is essentially looking at the data, all right, through the BI area. So if you have an E5 license, you can look at the Power BI. If you don't have that license to look at the data from Dataverse, you can still see it from Power BI, but if you need to use this app, you need to be part of that licensing scheme. Why do I bring that up now? The COE typically is installed with a service account or an installer account that has the powers that it needs. That doesn't mean that the administrator is part of that work. The administrator probably should have license anyway because they're going to be touching and looking at all these different things. All right, so this one actually comes up with the reason why you would have to have at least two to play with things. If you don't, then it's just something that you can't necessarily use, and then you'll be limited to the tool set that you're given. All right, other things that are in here. There's a DLP editor and like set permissions apps, just like little itty bitty apps that do things here and there. Maybe that should be consolidated. Well, to be sure, these are the cases where we would have put them into the main system, but because of how they're used and because they're the kinds of things that could change in such a drastic way that it'll affect the main system we make, we have them separate. So just keep in mind that these are other tools that are there. A big shout out for the DLP editor. It's the only way to actually create reusable DLP pieces. That does not happen currently on the main system. So that one, you can almost, like, if you get it by yourself and use it just for the DLP pieces and forget everything else, there's a tool you could potentially get by with. All right, other things over here. The documentation is a tool. All right, the governance docs, the standard best practices, adoption docs, everything that you look at with the pieces are the tools that actually help you get going. And when I say the seeds for Copilot over here, you could use your own documentation to bring in and point at it, maybe with your own own systems and use that as a helpful tool to itself. Search is essentially your friend over here. The Bing search even better, but at least understanding where the documents are or how to address them is going to be a key piece over here. There's also a sample planning solution that's out there. If you go to the COE area, there's it's called the sample planning kit. You basically bring it in. It'll give you like a set of dashboards and everything else that will and spreadsheets actually to take a look at. A spreadsheet. Whoa, wait a minute. What are they doing? Giving us manual pieces to do this kind of work? Well, it's in the kit, and it will help you with planning. For example, planning environments, planning the users, and all these pieces. Very, very cool tool. It's not something that you would use all the time, and it's something to definitely consider, but not necessarily a tool required for you to run as an admin. Okay, taking a look at our time here, we're doing pretty well. All right, for the COE toolkit, of course, you need Power BI Desktop. Got to download it. Are you allowed to download it? If you can't, I mean, if there's something that you're going to ask for sure, it's this, the Power BI Desktop. Please, admin, all on high, folks, give me the permission to install Power BI Desktop and use it. If you cannot do this, you can actually not be able to install the system. If you have a service account that's the only one that can use it, then you're going to need to be able to use that service account to go after it if that's the only account that's allowed to use it. But here's the thing. If there's anything that the COE toolkit needs for a download for anything else, this is a must-have. And I think in general, you should have Power BI for everything else that you're doing. All right, yep, that's all there is to it. All right, let's go back deep in the weeds for administrators that are really into the heavy tool set. So the first two you saw that we went through, by the way, would be your, I'm going to call them the garden stakes, the core pieces that every administrator should be working with. From this point on, now the administrators that have A, time in their hands, B, the wherewithal to actually mess around with the other bits over here. And these are the tools. The first one's PAC CLI. You can download this piece over here, and you can do a lot of these things just through the session without actually going into the interface and getting that work done. And the idea, of course, is that you can create scripts and you can do your own like mini automation for those things over here. VS Code extensions. If you are a user of VS Code or understand how that works, all of these things are available as extensions. So they essentially took it and put a little UI to it. There's still some typing in and scripting that you have to do, but they made it a lot simpler. Like say you're connecting to an environment versus another one. They give you a drop down to do that instead of you having to type in the command. Those are very, very useful. And also helpful, especially if you're just managing script. You're an administrator that does scripting. Scripting is essentially programming, it's code and everything else. So just like the low code side of things, it'd be nice if there was an interface to be able to deal with it. VS Code is one of the best ones to do that. Next, of course, is GitHub and Azure DevOps for the pipeline tools themselves. And this is over and above what's available now in the interface. Administrators may have deployment management responsibilities. Not all do. In fact, workload-wise, I would recommend that be its own group, especially if you're doing a lot of work in that particular area. But if you are the one that's tasked for it, you do want to keep these tools in mind and understand how they work, right? There's not much to this. You simply connect to them, and you either have access to work with them, and you can learn how to do them. There's all kinds of videos and documentation on how it goes.
Ralph, can you hear me again, please? Ralph, can you hear me? Ralph?
Don't worry. I hope the session with Ralph was.
Hello, was somebody muted me? Hello, did somebody mute me?
Yes, Ralph, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Did somebody, the presenter was lost at 11:26. Oh, that 2 minutes ago. Okay, good. Let me reshare. Looks like my connection was killed. One moment, please.
Thank you so much.
Let me put back everything on. In fact, everything was turned off. Let me reshare and then wait 2 minutes. I know where I was 2 minutes ago. Stand by. Alrighty. All right, let's go back over here. I believe a couple of minutes ago, I was discussing the COE. Are we, so maybe somebody on the chat can say, yes, you were at the COE, or say what they last saw. And let me go back to the chat to go see that particular area. Okay, so anyone remember? The last thing they saw? Just to see when it went off. Somewhere around 11:26. Oh, no one can type? It's possible that folks are blocked from typing. Well, let me try over here again. Hopefully we didn't miss too much on the COE particular part, because we'll actually carry on from over there. All right, just taking a look at the COE pieces. We talked about that. We said for the COE, we needed the Power BI desktop. So there's the tool. We are talking about the actual deep in the weeds, which means the developers, the administrators that need to actually do scripting or go into deeper levels of admin, including deployment and perhaps even assisting with code and everything else with the code quality. The CLI tools, the VS Code extensions, and of course the Azure DevOps, to which a reminder, again, the managed environments is what provides a lot of these features. And so I was getting into this particular area when I discovered that we were offline for a little while. These are the tools that will be installed, that you will find yourself in your system. VS Code, if you're doing scripting, it's strongly recommended to have an IDE or some sort of system that you can use to manage at the very least what you're doing. If you're just doing Notepad for scripts and everything else, let's just say you will have a management issue at some point. If you're really good at it, more power to you, but I am strongly recommending VS Code be installed. PowerShell is the next thing that usually comes with a lot of systems, but you would want to update that to whatever the latest version. Of course, you've updated Windows, you're probably okay with your PowerShell, but that whole CLI thing and under the covers of that is really what controls PowerShell. In fact, a lot of Power Platform pieces in general had PowerShell ways of getting there. Not all of it was easily documented or easily available. You had to learn a lot of those particular things, but the PowerShell is your next friend over here, because if you have to get something and someone's trying to help you, PowerShell may be the way. Having access to Git, if you're doing the GitHub pieces, again, very, very useful. You can use it for yourself to go and get, for example, you can go and get things from the community that could help you. And if they're usually on GitHub somewhere else, and you can use that the Git tools to actually bring it down. The VS Code extensions over here, there's several things over here. Pack CLI, where essentially you can come in, you can use it. And by the way, you can use Pack CLI without VS Code. And I include instructions over here that you can take a look at, take a picture. all right, on how this works. So if you want to do Pack CLI without it, you can actually bring it in with .NET. Having a GitHub account is very, very useful, again, so you can participate with getting things from the community and perhaps giving back as well. Any other tools that are out there? There might be for some of these. A lot of them you'd have to go take a look at and find, because you may find them in the community. There's like admin tools that are sometimes they're from actual organizations that said, here's an admin tool that helps on your Power Platform admin, that augments it, and they could be from a major vendor. I will not say no to those. If those are available to you, go ahead, make the most of it. All right, some word on these favorite tools. All right, for Power Platform solutions, we have the Creator Kit. The Creator Kit is a very interesting one because as an administrator, you might be asked to be in charge of, like, say, what all Power Platform practices are going to be. For example, the theming, the branding, and those particular cases. The Creator Kit is one of those most important tools that are set for that. So you're trying to do theming and controlling the theme. The COE came with something. The Creator Kit, as part of the COE, actually does it in a different way. So you're going to ask, Ralph, which one should I use, theming or Creator Kit? Theming or Creator Kit? Well, I will say that the theming is phasing out. That's my tip, is phasing out. The Creator Kit is more of the way, but they're also building that into, now if you've seen modern controls, you might have heard of that. Those areas are being added right in. All right, and finally, the Copilots. Copilots are going to change everything. The obvious one right now for using it to help you do things is to use Bing Chat, right? And get those deep links in there to get your help for essentially for a lot of things. But then again, with a grain of salt, how you ask can make a difference. The information you get back is something that's best if you can try them out on your own dev environment before you try them in a major area. That would be the way to go. All right, another tip. Yes, hello.
Ralph, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, we ran out of time.
Oh, we did.
Yeah, we did. I wish we can have more time. Your presentation was excellent. We love to have you here.
Okay, actually, this was my last slide over here, so I'm just going to leave it up so you can go see your notes and take a picture of this slide, and then we can end it right here.
Hi, everyone.